I took a DNA test to claim my inheritance, and my mother started to panic. In Florence, they know me as Elara Bellini. That name carries the weight of legendary violins and the glorious legacy of the Bellini family. They see the fame, the fortune, the brilliance, but they do not see the cost. No one sees the truth I had to sacrifice, a truth buried for decades within my own family, hidden only by a man's pride and a lie. I begin my story this way. My father, Maestro Lorenzo Bellini, the master luthier the world called a genius. My mother, Sophia, the beautiful gentlewoman who always stepped aside so he could shine. My sister, Isabella, the perfect daughter, proud, and my father's final masterpiece of spirit. And then there was me, the one who tore away the silk veil that blinded them all, the one who turned everything upside down. Now my hands are old, thin, wrinkled, yet steady. I sit patiently, repairing the spine of an old book. That is my work, gathering what seems broken, what others have left to decay, and finding a way to bring it back to life, much like my own life. My father was Maestro Lorenzo Bellini. People called him a genius. To me, he was a man consumed by obsession. He did not believe he was making violins, he believed he was creating living beings. And for him, perfection and bloodline were everything. I remember once standing in the workshop, watching him lift a newly finished violin up to eye level. The light caught the honey-coloured varnish. He was not speaking to me. He was speaking to the instrument. "Blood, Elara." He suddenly turned toward me, his eyes cold and sharp. "The secret is not in the wood or the varnish. It is in the blood of the Bellini." At the time, I did not truly understand. I just nodded. My mother, Sophia, was the quiet embodiment of Florence's classical beauty, but she never really shone. She merely existed in the shadow of my father's greatness. She moved through our large house without a sound. She made sure his coffee was always hot, his tools always spotless, and that no one ever disturbed him while he worked. That was my mother. She existed to keep my father's world running flawlessly. She was a shadow in every sense. And then there was Isabella, my sister. She was no shadow. She was the light. Isabella was my father's ultimate masterpiece. Beautiful, confident, and carrying within her everything he worshipped. Whenever Isabella stepped into the workshop, the stern lines of my father's face seemed to soften. He would put his tools down and look at her with absolute pride. "Look at Isabella," he once told an important client. "She has the hands of a true Bellini." At that moment, my own hands were stained with ink from an old book I was trying to repair. I hid them behind my back. I did not have the hands of a Bellini. I had the hands of an outsider. I did not love the scent of wood. I loved the scent of paper. I did not want to create something new. I wanted to save what was old. To my father, that was an insult. That was my family. A god. A shadow. A masterpiece. And me. I am the one telling this story. My father believed that the talent of the Bellini bloodline flowed through our veins. It was not a simple belief. It was his religion. He was never a father in the truest sense. He was a god presiding over his workshop, demanding nothing less than the absolute. Everything had to be perfect, from the curve of a piece of wood to the silence of those around him. Isabella was different. She embodied that perfection. She was beautiful, graceful, and spoke to clients with a confidence I could never possess. Isabella did not build violins with her own hands. She did not have to. Her gift was selling them, telling their stories, transforming the Bellini name from one of respect into one of legend. My father's pride in her was unrestrained. She was living proof of his faith in blood. I remember one time, a German collector came to the workshop. He was demanding, scrutinizing every tiny detail of a violin my father had poured himself into. My father began to lose patience, and then Isabella walked in. She wore a silk dress in deep blue, her hair pinned neatly back. She smiled, and without hesitation, took the violin from my father's hands as if it had always belonged to her. "Its resonance is perfect, Mr. Schmidt," she said in fluent German. But what's truly important is the story it will tell in your hands. The man's demeanor changed instantly. He was captivated. Half an hour later, he left with the violin and a check for a large sum. My father watched Isabella, his eyes sparkling. He turned to me and the assistant, but he didn't seem to truly see us. He simply said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Look at her," he said. "She has the hands of a Bellini." My hands, at that moment, were covered in paper dust. I loved the smell of old paper and glue, not the smell of ebony or varnish. While other children played in the garden, I would hide in my grandfather's library, caressing the peeling, leather-bound books. To me, saving an old book was more important than creating a new instrument. When I was 15, I opened my own small book restoration shop at the end of the street. I used my own savings. I remember how happy I was when I successfully restored my first book. It was an old volume of poetry, its cover nearly falling apart. I glued it back together, cleaning each page. I brought it to my father, full of hope. "See, Father, I saved it," I said. My father took the book. He didn't look at it. He looked at my hands, which still had a bit of glue on them. Then he placed the book on the table, gently but firmly. "Bellinis create masterpieces," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We don't patch up things that have faded." He wasn't angry. He was just disappointed. And that disappointment was heavier than any scolding. He turned his back and returned to his work. From that moment on, I understood. I didn't belong there. In the story he was writing for the Bellini family, there was no role for me. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat. I had no interest in ebony or strings. I tried. Once. When I was little, my father placed a small chisel in my hand, showing me how to carve a piece of wood. My grip was clumsy. The blade slipped, leaving an ugly scratch. My father said nothing. He simply took the chisel back and corrected the flaw himself. He never placed it in my hand again. My world lay elsewhere. In my grandfather's library, I discovered old books. I loved the scent of aged paper, a fragrance both dry and sweet. I loved the fragile sound of a page turning, always afraid it might crumble in my hands. History was not dry facts to me. It was people, real lives sealed inside those books. So I chose to open a small restoration shop. It sat at the end of the street, hidden behind a cascade of bougainvillea. Inside, there was only silence, broken by the rustle of paper and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. That was my world. Here, there was no perfection, only salvation. I knew that in my father's eyes it was betrayal. He did not have to say it. I saw it in the way his gaze slid past me whenever I came home from the shop with dust on my clothes and glue on my hands. The day I brought him the restored book of poetry, he said it outright. "Bellinis create masterpieces, not patch up what has already faded," he told me. His voice carried no anger. It was cold, final. A sentence passed. He was not speaking only of the book. He was speaking of me. From that moment, an invisible wall rose between us. At dinners, my father and Isabella would discuss work orders from London, commissions from New York. My mother would try to draw me in. "Elara, how was the shop today?" I would answer, "It was fine. I am working on an old map." My father would not look up. Isabella would nod politely, then steer the conversation back to her world. "Father, I think we should raise the price of the Guarneri del Gesù line. Demand is very high right now." Oh, and that was it. My world closed off again. The conversation went on without me. I was not part of it. I was his disappointment. I knew that. I did not suffer because of it. I simply accepted it as truth. The Bellini family was a flawless symphony, with my father as the conductor. Isabella was the first violin, brilliant and radiant. My mother was the orchestra itself, supporting quietly from behind. And me? I was not even a wrong note. A wrong note is still part of the music. I was silence. Silence where there should have been sound. My father died on a Tuesday morning. The sky over Florence was unnaturally clear that day. The Bellini villa sank into a heavy silence, solemn and scripted. People dressed in black came and went, whispering, exchanging perfectly choreographed embraces. The air was heavy with grief, yet theatrical. Isabella stood at the center of it all, flawless in her black dress, receiving condolences with graceful sorrow. She was the very image of a devoted daughter in mourning. My mother sat in an armchair, hands folded in her lap, her face unreadable, and me, I stood in the corner, utterly unnecessary. I did not cry. I only felt emptiness, as if a long, burdensome chapter had finally come to its end. A week later, we sat in the office of Signor Ricci. It was an old room, filled with dark wood and leather-bound books. Ricci had been the family's lawyer since before I was born. His eyes looked weary. My mother sat upright, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Isabella sat beside her, calm and assured. She knew her place. I sat across from them, only hoping it would all be over soon so I could return to my shop. I expected nothing. Mr. Ricci slid on his glasses and opened a thick file. "Let us begin," he said, his voice low and steady. He read through the first clauses. My mother, Sophia Bellini, would retain full ownership of the villa and receive a lifetime allowance, enough to live in comfort. That made sense. Then came Isabella's part. The entirety of the Bellini brand, including the workshops, client lists, and business relations, shall be passed down to my eldest daughter, Isabella Bellini. I glanced at Isabella. She did not react. Of course she did not. That legacy was hers. It had always been hers. Mr. Ricci turned a page. He paused for a moment, cleared his throat. "And finally," he continued, "all of my personal assets, my most prized collection of antique violins, and the Bellini family trust." The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. I knew who it would go to. All of it, every last treasure, was meant for Isabella. It was the reward for being the perfect daughter. But Mr. Ricci spoke different words. "Shall belong to my younger daughter, Elara." That name rang through the stillness. Elara. My name. For a second, I was certain I had misheard. I looked at Mr. Ricci, then at my mother and sister. I heard Isabella's sudden inhale. Her calm facade cracked. Her face went pale. My mother lifted a hand to her mouth, eyes wide. But in her gaze, I did not see surprise. I saw something else. A surge of panic. Something raw. Something she could not hide. And me, I just sat there. My mind was empty. That name was mine, but it carried no meaning. It felt like a misprint in an important book, a single error capable of ruining the entire story. The silence in the room grew heavier. I could feel it pressing down. It was no longer the solemn silence of mourning. It was the silence of shock. I looked at Isabella. Her face had turned pale. She sat rigid, her lips pressed tightly into a thin line. I looked at my mother. She drew in a trembling breath, her hand rising to her chest as if she could not breathe. She nearly collapsed. Mr. Ricci had to place a reassuring hand on her shoulder. And then he continued reading. His voice remained steady, unchanged, as though he was simply reading a weather report. "With one condition," he said, each word striking like the blow of a hammer. "Elara must provide undeniable DNA evidence, proving she truly carries my blood. Blood. Always blood. His life began with it. And now, even in death, he remained haunted by it." Mr. Ricci paused for a moment, looking at me over his glasses. Then he read the final line of the clause. "If not, or if she refuses, the entire inheritance shall automatically transfer to Isabella Bellini." It was then that I understood. Everything became clear. My mind was no longer blank. Instead, a cold, sharp sensation spread through my chest. This was not a gift. This was my father's final slap from beyond the grave. A carefully calculated humiliation, carried out before my mother and my sister. He did not only doubt my devotion to his legacy, he doubted my very existence. He doubted whether I was ever truly a Bellini. I lifted my head. I looked at Isabella, The stunned expression on her face had vanished. In its place was something more complicated. She looked at me. In her eyes I saw pity, but beneath it, buried just a little deeper, was a flicker of triumph she could not conceal. She did not see this as an insult. She saw it as confirmation. In her mind, this was nothing more than a formality, a small hurdle, the final act of a play before everything returned to the order it was meant to have. She believed my father simply wanted clarity. She believed that once I submitted to this meaningless test, the inheritance would rightfully fall to her, the true heir. She believed she was the ultimate victor. I locked eyes with Mr. Ricci. I did not hesitate. "Mr. Ricci," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "I will take the test. Please make the arrangements." Isabella's lips curved into the faintest smirk. My mother closed her eyes. She said nothing. I agreed, not for the money, not for the collection of violins, not for the trust fund. None of that mattered to me. I agreed for honor. Because after a lifetime of being dismissed as a disappointment, I wanted one final piece of proof, an undeniable truth, to throw back at his legacy. I wanted to prove him wrong, at least about this. The weeks of waiting passed slowly. I still went to the bookshop every day, burying myself in work. I tried not to think about it. But my mother would not leave me in peace. She grew strange. She called me every single day, sometimes twice. Her voice was always sharp, urgent. "Elara, have the results come in yet?" It was always the same question. She never asked if I was all right. She never asked how I felt. Only, "Have the results come in yet?" I tried to be patient. "Not yet, Mother. They said it would take a few weeks." "Oh," she would say. Then the silence would stretch, long and heavy. "When you have them, call me immediately." I felt something was wrong. In her voice, it was not the worry of a mother for her daughter. It was raw fear. I could hear it, feel it, through the line, a fear I had never seen in her before. And then one morning, the letter arrived. It lay on the doormat, a thick white envelope with the official seal of the laboratory. My heart quickened. I carried it inside and placed it on my desk. I sat staring at it for a long while before sliding a letter opener across the top. Inside was a sheet filled with scientific terms and numbers. I skimmed over all of it. My eyes went straight to the final line, printed in bold. Conclusion: the DNA profile of subject Elara Bellini and reference sample Lorenzo Bellini shows a biological father-child relationship. Probability: 99.99%. I read the line twice, then a third time. I was the daughter of Lorenzo Bellini. Relief surged through me, so strong I had to steady myself against the edge of the desk. But almost immediately, a bitter taste rose in my mouth. I had been forced to prove what should have been self-evident. I had won. The first thing I did was call my mother. I wanted to hear the release in her voice. I wanted her to say, "I always knew." "Mother, it's me," I said when she picked up. "The results are in." "How is it?" Her voice was almost a strangled scream. They matched. I am his daughter. Silence on the other end. Not the silence of joy, the silence of something lifeless. I heard a sudden sharp intake of breath. "Oh," my mother finally said, her voice trembling. "Oh, that is good, my love. Good. Very good. I am happy for you." She lied. There was no joy in her voice. It was full of panic. She was more terrified than ever, and she was trying desperately to conceal it. I hung up. I sat motionless in the chair. Her reaction made no sense. It was completely irrational. And then a question began to take shape in my mind. Sharp, cold, undeniable. Why would she be afraid that I had been proven my father's child? A mother should have been relieved, unless the result she feared was not a mismatch. Could it be? Her fear was not about me at all. Could it have been about someone else? The seed of doubt my mother had planted was now beginning to sprout. I could not push it aside. My work as a restorer had taught me one thing. The truth often hides beneath the surface, beneath peeling covers, beneath yellowed pages. You have to be patient. You have to search for the cracks, the signs that something does not belong. That night, I did not go home. I went to my father's workshop. The place was cold and silent, stripped of the familiar rhythm of chisels and planes. The smell of pine and varnish still lingered, mixed with dust. His tools still hung on the walls, arranged in perfect order. I began searching. I had no idea what I was looking for, but I worked methodically, the way I would examine an old book. I ran my hand along the drawers, tested the joints. At his main workbench, the one where he had spent most of his life, there was a wooden panel at the back. I tapped it lightly. The sound at one spot was hollower than the rest. I dug my fingernail into the seam. The board popped loose. Inside was a hidden compartment. I expected to find documents, maybe another will, but no. There was only a small leather-bound notebook, worn and faded with age. It was my father's journal. I sat down right there, on the wooden floor covered in dust, and began to read. His handwriting was sharp and precise, just like he had been. The first pages spoke about work, about techniques for building violins, but the further I read, the more personal the tone became. And then I saw a name, Antoine Dubois. My father wrote about him endlessly. Antoine Dubois was a French luthier. My father called him an enemy, a rival. He wrote about their fierce competition at contests in Paris, in Cremona. His pen bit into the paper whenever he wrote about this man. He called Dubois vain, a man consumed by ambition. I kept turning the pages, and then I stopped at one. "Betrayal that cannot be forgiven," he wrote. "Inside my own house." I looked at the date at the top of the page. My heart skipped a beat. The date was 36 years ago, about 9 months before Isabella was born. I closed the journal. My hands had gone cold. I went back to the villa. I climbed up to the attic, where my mother kept all the old keepsakes. I found a box of photographs. I spilled them onto the floor and began searching. I found a picture taken at a competition in Paris. My father stood stiffly on one side. My mother was next to him. And on the other side, laughing, leaning close to her, was a man I did not recognize. He was handsome, with dark hair and bright eyes. Beneath the photo, in my mother's handwriting, Paris 1988. Lorenzo and Antoine Dubois. I set the photo down. Then I picked up a recent picture of Isabella. I placed them side by side. Antoine Dubois had Isabella's eyes. He had the same smile, the same way the corners of his mouth curved. Everything fell into place. My mother's fear, my father's obsession with blood, the cruel condition in the will. My father knew, or at least, he suspected. He had carried that suspicion for years. He did not suspect me. He suspected Isabella. I sat there on the cold attic floor, the two photographs side by side. Everything fit together, the unease of my mother, the obsession with bloodlines that haunted my father, the cruel condition in the will. I saw it all now. My father had doubted for a very long time. Not me. Isabella. His perfect masterpiece, the heir he had poured all his faith into, might have been the daughter of his greatest enemy. He could not face that truth. It would have destroyed everything he had built his pride most of all. The DNA trap he set for me was nothing more than a desperate final test. It was never aimed at me. It was aimed at himself. He had hoped my result would reassure him. If I, the unwanted daughter, was proven to be his blood, then maybe his doubts about Isabella were wrong. He used me as bait to soothe his own fear. A selfish, merciless act. But suspicion was not proof. I needed the final truth. A truth that could not be denied. The next morning, I called Mr. Ricci. "Mr. Ricci," I said calmly, "there are a few additional legal procedures I'd like clarified. I need the lab to conduct one more DNA comparison between me and Isabella." There was silence on the line for a moment. "What for, Elara?" he asked, slightly surprised. "To ensure the integrity of the will," I replied. "I want everything to be absolutely transparent." It was a reasonable request. Mr. Ricci agreed. Isabella seemed irritated when she was informed, but she could not refuse something framed as a legal necessity. She still believed it was nothing more than my excessive caution. She had no idea. A week later, the second set of results arrived. This time they were delivered directly to Mr. Ricci's office at my request. He called me immediately. "Elara, the results are in. Can you come to my office?" His voice sounded different, tight, strained. I went to see him. He did not say much. He simply pushed an envelope across the desk. I opened it. The results confirmed the worst. The two subjects share the same mother, but not the same father. The words were printed clearly, without the slightest ambiguity. There it was, the final proof. Isabella Bellini, my father's so-called perfect masterpiece, was in truth Isabella Dubois. I called for one final meeting on a Tuesday. I told Mr. Ricci it was to finalize the procedures. That was not a lie. This was the final procedure. We gathered once again in that dark, wood-panelled room. Isabella looked relaxed, even wearing a faint, private smile. She believed she was about to hear of some settlement, some division of wealth. My mother looked pale. She sat in silence, clutching the straps of her handbag, avoiding my eyes. And me, I felt nothing. No anger, no triumph, only a cold, steady calm. I did not say much. I opened my briefcase. I took out 3 items and placed them on the polished oak table. I pushed them forward, slow and deliberate. First, my DNA results proof that I was the rightful heir of Lorenzo Bellini. Second, the DNA comparison between me and Isabella. I had marked the conclusion in bold. The two subjects share the same mother, but not the same father. Third, a photograph of the luthier Antoine Dubois, set beside a portrait of Isabella. No explanation was needed. Everything was there, laid bare on the table. Isabella frowned. She reached for the second report first. Her eyes scanned the page. I watched her closely. I caught the moment she read the highlighted line. The colour drained from her beautiful face. The subtle smile disappeared. Her proud shoulders slumped. Her mouth fell open, but no sound came out. Her hand trembled as she set the paper down. Then her eyes shifted to the photographs. She looked into the stranger's eyes. She looked at his smile, and then she laughed. It was not laughter of joy. It was dry, fractured, torn from deep within her chest. She looked at the paper, at the photographs, and she laughed, louder and louder, but there was no trace of happiness in it. It was the laugh of someone realizing her entire world, her legacy, her supposed birthright was built on a lie. It was the moment Isabella Bellini, the woman I once knew, ceased to exist. My mother did not need to read the documents. She only had to look at Isabella's face. And she knew. She collapsed forward. She did not scream. She simply covered her face with both hands and began to weep. Choked, shuddering sobs buried for 36 years, finally broke free. "It was only once," she whispered through her hands, her voice broken. "Just once. I was so lonely. Your father, he only ever saw his violins. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. I have lived my whole life in fear." She confessed everything. A moment of weakness, a silent act of revenge against a husband who cared only for his craft, and a lifetime devoured by fear. Isabella stopped laughing. She stood. She did not look at me. She did not look at our mother. She simply walked out of the room. The door slammed shut behind her. She left soon after, carrying nothing but her handbag. I later heard from Mr. Ricci that she abandoned the Bellini name. She began a new life in France, or so they said. We never saw each other again. My mother lived out her remaining years in silence, in the hollow villa, echoing only with the ghosts of the past. She was no longer my father's shadow. She was simply no longer there. I inherited the legacy, the workshop, the collection, the trust fund. All of it became mine. But I did not run it the way my father did. I did not care about bloodlines. I transformed the Bellini workshop into the Bellini Heritage Foundation, a place to preserve the craft of lutherie, a place to train gifted young artisans. I never asked who they were or where they came from. I only looked at their hands and at what they created. True legacy does not live in the blood. It lives in the hands and in the heart. And I am still here, in my little bookshop, I still spend my days mending broken spines, cleaning yellowed pages. Healing books is also how I heal myself. The story of my family, though filled with pain, is now shelved neatly in the archives of the past. It has ended, and I at last have found peace. Not in perfect violins, not in a celebrated legacy, but in silence itself, in the dissonant note of my own life.